It seems that Judge Frank Caprio was the loveliest grandfather in America. Millions of people wept with delight at his courtroom performance. However, all changed in November 2023. Just when his family learned something startling about his years on the bench, he received a severe diagnosis. For months, critics have been speculating about what actually transpired behind the cameras. Even though his son David understood the truth, he said nothing. The last few months unveiled secrets that made his fight against cancer appear simple. You will be devastated by what his family discovered in his personal documents. On November 24, 1936, he was born in a chilly tenement on Federal Hill in Providence, Rhode Island. Since there was no hot running water, they dubbed it a cold water flat. The only sources of heat are a pot-bellied stove, an oven door that is cracked open for additional warmth, and excursions to the public bathhouse across the street for a hot shower. Antonio and Filomena Caprio, who had little but nonetheless managed to make that small apartment feel loving, reared Frank Caprio as the second of 3 boys. They didn't use material possessions to gauge wealth. They used togetherness as a metric. The family was kept close by that warmth during difficult times and harsh winters. Antonio, his father, was poor and only had a 7th-grade education. He was from Tiano, Italy. He delivered milk throughout the city and sold fruit door-to-door from a wooden cart to support the family during the Great Depression. At 4 a.m., he would wake Frank and his brother. He refused to stop bringing milk to families with children, even if they were unable to pay, and advised them, if you don't want to do this forever, stay in school. He simply paid for it himself. He taught himself psychology and eventually became a published author after years of arduous work. The quiet hero was his mother, Filomena, who was born to immigrants from Naples. She never went out to eat. She never purchased an outfit for herself unless it was absolutely required. To save a few bucks, she forewent prenatal treatment. She was well known in the community, though, for lending a helping hand to others who were struggling to make ends meet. To celebrate that giving spirit, Frank renamed his philanthropic foundation the Filomena Fund in her honor in 2018. Frank Caprio began shining shoes on Federal Hill's sidewalks when he was 10 years old. He cleaned the worn leather of immigrants who did not understand English, fathers who were struggling to provide for their children, and men who had lost their jobs for nickels and dimes. He spoke less and listened more. Heard tales of suffering, pride, and tenacity. Despite the snow, he also delivered newspapers before dawn. No complaints, no shortcuts. Early on, he discovered that employment was not an escape. It was a source of dignity. He was working 3 jobs by the time he was a teenager. Delivering papers, helping his father carry milk before sunrise, and cleaning dishes at diners. He went to school and wrestled his way to the Rhode Island State Championship in 1953 despite having blistered hands and not getting any sleep. He continued the same struggle at Providence College. He worked Sunday at 2 a.m. and washed automobiles. Worked shifts at the Providence Journal putting together newspapers and covered all of his own tuition. He earned his bachelor's degree in science in 1958. His father wept at the event. Silently delivering milk, the man saw his kid achieve what he was never able to. After that, Frank began instructing Hope High School students on American government. He wanted more, but he loved it. He couldn't afford to stop teaching in order to pursue his dream of becoming a lawyer. So he devised a ruthless scheme. He drove 50 meters to Suffolk University Law School in Boston every day after school let out at 3:30. He went to night classes, returned home after 10 p.m., took a short nap, and then resumed his teaching duties. He spent 7 years doing it. He became the first professional in his family to earn a law degree in 1965. He worked as a legal clerk in Providence during his time in law school. He dealt with unglamorous files. Parking infractions, shattered families, petty theft, and folks barely making ends meet. He spent the night reading their tales. Tales that he never forgot. For him, the law was more than a system. People's actual lives were reflected in it. On the same property where his mother and aunts had once resided, he founded his own company, Caprio & Caprio, in 1965 at the age of 28. Later, he would go there with his cousin Anthony and his sons, Frank Jr. and David. It was more than just an office building. Even though it was a complete circle, his public life had already started. He won a position on the Providence City Council in 1962, representing the same neighborhood where he polished shoes, by defeating a strong longtime incumbent at the age of just 25. His energy was unrelenting, and his speeches were ferocious. 25 police officers had to break up a street fight between around 400 supporters during one of his rallies in 1966. Nevertheless, Frank was re-elected. In 1968 and 1970, he ran for lieutenant governor and attorney general, respectively, receiving 43.3% of the vote against a Republican opponent. That race wasn't won by him. He wasn't finished, though. Caprio had already completed 8 years of service in the U.S. Army Reserve and Rhode Island National Guard as a member of the 876th Combat Engineer Battalion before his legal career took off. He began training at Camp Varnum and Fort Indiantown Gap in 1954, and he credited that experience with shaping his moral compass, which would eventually define him in court. Even in his last years of pancreatic cancer, he never missed a veteran's function. Despite everything, wrestling continued to be a part of his narrative. He went back to coach at Hope High, where he had taught, following his 1953 championship victory at Central High School. He was simultaneously a law student, a coach, and a teacher. He gained more from wrestling than just strength. It taught him self-control, justice, and perseverance in the face of adversity. He was familiar with the experience of beginning at the bottom. And for that reason, he didn't see criminals when people entered his courtroom decades later, broke, afraid, and ashamed. He observed people. And he thought of the shoeshiner who used to kneel on Providence's chilly streets and hear tales from individuals who were merely trying to make ends meet. He never saw that boy again. In 1962, Frank Caprio shocked everyone by defeating a long-serving council president to win a seat on the Providence City Council at the age of 25. A polished politician, he was not. He was just a young Federal Hill resident who valued listening over speaking. His campaign had its roots in his childhood neighborhood, which was so near that you could smell the bakery his mother used to pass every morning. Years later, he founded his law practice in the Caprio building, which was only a few hundred feet from his childhood home and on the exact spot where his mother and aunts had once resided. Everything remained near. He had established a successful legal practice by the time he was 49. Then, however, something changed. He was offered a position on the Providence Municipal Court by Mayor Joseph Powino Jr. in 1985. Frank accepted it. He would spend the next 38 years living on that bench. Nobody anticipated what would happen next. Most people thought he would continue to operate in the same manner once he was suddenly elevated to chief judge in 1990, but he didn't. In order to prevent individuals from missing work to contest a parking ticket, he altered court scheduling. He posed genuine inquiries in an effort to understand people rather than to trick them. He allowed others to speak. Others brought their children, a man sleeping in his car, a woman with cancer, and others broke down. He took his time with them. He paid attention. In November 2020, one of those stories was published. Tisha Miller barely managed to keep her composure as she appeared in court with her young daughter, Jamia. She was trying to manage her fibromyalgia while raising her daughter while homeless and living in her van. Because where do you park when you live in your car? She had parked where she wasn't supposed to. After dropping the accusations, Caprio hesitated. He gave her $50 from the Philomena Fund and stated that he wished to do more. Miller froze. Her eyes grew wide. "You are aware that I am completely broke, Your Honor. Thank you so much for that. I genuinely do. You're not understanding." However, he did. That money. Philomena. It began modestly. After seeing his show Caught in Providence in 2018, Angie Chesser, an Indiana single mother, sent in $25. She requested that he donate it to a different mother in need. Caprio helped a woman in need with it. Then followed more letters. Then dozens more. Roberto Jacobs in New Orleans gave me $25. David Stone in New York gave me $50. They trusted Caprio to share what they could. and again he did.
In honor of his mother, Philomena, who generously helped her neighbors despite their lack of resources. He changed more than one courtroom.
He completely altered the tone.
He was confronted by a college student in 1992 who had been fined $500 for jaywalking on his way to a job interview.
He had no money. Caprio cleaned the fine.
He didn't care that it was contentious.
Someone was attempting, I noticed.
He claimed the case changed the way that people discussed discretion and kindness in the legal system. In 2005, an 82-year-old widow reported that she had parked illegally after returning from her husband's burial. She had lost all of her savings. Caprio dismissed the fine after telling her story aloud. There were instances when a parking penalty involved more than merely parking. He had drafted a policy that few judges had ever seen by the middle of the 1990s. Notes about the individual's life, employment status, health, family, and challenges were to be included in every case file. He wasn't merely keeping track of infractions.
He wanted to know what had happened to them.
One man received numerous fines for speeding.
Caprio found that he was secretly fighting alcoholism. He got him help instead of fines. Repeat offenses decreased by 30% over time.
This change, people, not just documents, spread to other courts around the nation.
The court overflowed during the 2010 recession.
Jobs vanished. Bills were piling up. Every night, Caprio brought 50 new files home to read. To go to court, one man traveled 5 miles.
He had 92 cents.
Caprio made sure the man had a transport home and paid the fine himself. He wasn't referred to as a judge back then. He was referred to be the judge of the people. A woman was frightened when she stood in front of him in 1988, long before his courtroom was filmed. The law had been broken by her. However, Caprio noticed the bruises in her words as she talked. They were mistreating her. He did not discipline her.
She helped him.
That turned into the design. He created something new and improved year after year, case after case. Strange things began to happen on Providence's late-night public access television in 1995.
The video came from a tiny courtroom and was blurry.
Just Judge Frank Caprio, a calm voice behind the bench, and local residents describing why they ran a red light or parked too close to a fire hydrant. No actors, no scripts. Joseph, his brother, was the man behind the camera. Perhaps, he reasoned, someone would observe.
Perhaps not.
Then one evening, a man entered and claimed that aliens had kidnapped him after he missed a red light.
No one blinked. The audience became luminous.
There were more than 1,000 calls. A few chuckled. A few were upset.
The legality of airing this was questioned by some. However, it stuck for some reason.
By 2000, Caught in Providence was airing on Saturday nights on WLN, an ABC affiliate, instead of midnight cable.
Something larger was emerging from a local endeavor.
Then, in 2002, a man by the name of Daniel Murray appeared before the judge, and the courtroom fell silent. He was a single father who received a parking fine for purchasing infant formula.
His account balance was 92 cents.
To get to court, he had to walk 5 kilometers from East Providence.
Caprio didn't pose many queries.
Silently, he reached into his pocket and took out $250 from the Philomena Fund, a fund he had named after his mother. He covered the cost of the fine himself.
He then instructed Daniel to give it back at a later time. The program was broadcast nationwide. Overnight, WLN's ratings increased by 50%.
All of a sudden, it was more than a show. It was not the same thing. A man with low eyes and a trembling voice debuted in 2007. He had stolen groceries for his famished pets rather than for himself. He was sleeping in his car after losing his job.
If his pets couldn't eat, he didn't want to either. He wasn't lectured by Caprio.
He assigned him community service.
No penalty.
The video was captured by a covert camera.
It was unprocessed. The audience sobbed. Caprio remained silent.
He simply nodded and continued.
The internet, however, remembered.
He was this person. By 2010, Caught in Providence was syndicated all across the United States. That year, a different kind of buzz was generated by one episode. In front of the judge was a defendant who eerily resembled a well-known celebrity. It was captured by the cameras. Online debates erupted, but many continued to watch, wondering, was the judge swayed? Was justice turning into entertainment? Instead of declining, ratings increased. Caprio was no longer just a judge. At dinner tables, people argued about him. Then 2016 arrived, a year that would alter everything. Victor Qua, 96, appeared in court after receiving a speeding ticket. Although he appeared frail, his tale was powerful. He didn't want to be late because he had been taking his 63-year-old son to cancer treatment. He was never a driver. But he had to that day. After listening, Caprio remarked, "You are a good man. You really are what America is all about." The video quickly went viral. More than 15 million views. Just the truth, without any music or effects. The world stopped when it saw it. A judge who understood, a father caring for his son. For millions of people who had never heard of Providence before, that moment characterized Frank Caprio. TikTok discovered him in 2018. In front of Caprio, a woman accused cursed jewelry of being the reason for her unpaid penalties. It sounded absurd. Caprio arched an eyebrow before stating that she was escaping marital violence. All she had were a few of suitcases and her jewels. No assistance, no house. Caprio disregarded the penalties. He then gave her support, resources, and shelter contacts. In just a few days, that video received over 100 million impressions. Not only did people watch it, but they also shared it and discussed it. They began to view the court as more than just a venue for punishment. The program had collaborated with Facebook Watch by 2019. By 2023, the number of views had surpassed 2 billion. However, folks weren't captivated by the platforms or cameras. It was the way Caprio met people's eyes. A nurse who had been penalized for running a red light stood in front of him in 2020, at the height of the pandemic. She had just completed a double shift of 16 hours. She was worn out. She was completely unaware of what she had done. After speaking with his officers and dismissing the ticket, Caprio turned to face her. The video quickly gained popularity. It was viewed as a tribute by frontline workers. For ordinary people, it was a sign of hope. However, 2021 wasn't without its challenges. A video of Caprio being forgiving of a repeat offender who was caught stealing went viral that year. The man was addicted to gambling. Social media took over. Critics claimed that Caprio was becoming too innocent, overly forgiving, and soft. However, it was later revealed that Caprio had covertly paid for the man's rehabilitation. Quiet activity, no news releases, no cameras. The same detractors returned with an apology. Everyone in attendance was reminded at that moment that justice was more than just punishment. It also had to do with fixing. Then, in February 2025, Caprio published Compassion in the Court, a book that included 50 unseen tales from his time on the bench. The instance of a homeless veteran who received a parking ticket in 2015 caught our attention, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it were missed VA appointments, misplaced paperwork, and untreated PTSD. Caprio put him in touch with the appropriate individuals and assisted him in applying for assistance. The penalty was removed. He began to reconstruct his life. It was more than just a memoir. It was a blueprint for what justice would look like if it had a heart. Frank Caprio's life changed drastically after he married Joyce in 1965. In the Italian-American community of Providence, he had met her during a brief romance. And they never drifted apart once they were together. Joyce sat quietly in the background of Frank's life for almost 60 years. She was always close enough for him to feel her presence, whether she was in the court gallery or the crowd during his speeches. She hardly ever sought attention or spoke to the media. But Frank talked about her a lot. He referred to her as the amazing woman who bestowed upon him their 5 children, the greatest gift of all. And he meant it when he said it. In Federal Hill, where they grew up, dinner was more than simply food, it was also about listening. Their table turned into a makeshift tribunal, replete with teachings about kindness, justice, and the value of listening to others. Frank, T., David, John, Paul, and Marissa were raised on tales of rehabilitated defendants who had erred but were granted another opportunity. They witnessed their father put himself through school, wash dishes, and shine shoes. They witnessed their mother maintain the family's stability, particularly during times of political unpredictability. David, one of their kids, would contribute to making those tales into something far more significant years later.
Caught in Providence would be watched by millions of people. However, the principles that underpinned it originated at home. Joyce fiercely guarded that house. Frank was repeatedly offered bribes during his tenure as a city councilor in the 1960s. Joyce took care to prevent him from taking them. She kept things tidy, kept an eye on the books, and ensured that their children could be proud of their family name. She didn't need to, but she didn't raise her voice. She had the kind of strength that kept things going without anyone noticing. She reminded him of his identity when things became difficult, as they did. In high school, Frank wrestled. He never let go of that aspect of himself after winning a state championship in 1953. On weekends, he would playfully pin his grandchildren and tell them stories of his career while still wrestling with them, even though he was in his 80s. Real stories about individuals in need and the choices they had to make, not simply amusing ones. Sophia, his granddaughter, recalled how Dad would gently remind them to be kind and to always be near their friends. These weren't merely trips. They served as lessons. They were left behind. Every day wasn't simple. Frank dismissed a case in the 1990s. The defendant committed suicide a few days later. After that, he was unable to fall asleep. At night, he would lie awake and replay the choice in his thoughts. He spoke with David. The family eventually attended treatment together. They discussed the burden of having to pass judgment. Frank did not conceal himself under his robe. When it hurt, he acknowledged it. He demonstrated to his kids, and later to their kids, that being strong did not entail suppressing feelings. It required confronting it. From 1990 to 1998, Frank presided over the Rhode Island Board of Governors for Higher Education. He never forgot the experience of hardship. He persevered through law school, worked evenings, and, after gaining power, used it to assist others in doing the same. He authorized scholarships worth more than $50 million for kids from low-income families. He started a scholarship program for children in his own neighborhood, Federal Hill, in 1995. During his first 5 years, enrollment among low-income students increased by 25%. His efforts had reached 25% of the state's Pell Grant applicants by the end of that decade. He recalled what it was like to have no shot, so hundreds of pupils received theirs. He established the Frank Caprio Scholarship Fund in 2000. It awarded $100,000 annually to wrestling and legal aid students. He was defined by two things. For stealing athletic equipment, one Central High student was on the verge of being arrested. After receiving the scholarship, clearing his record, attending college, and returning to help other teenagers avoid problems, he became a counselor. It was not an uncommon story. Over 120 children were assisted by the charity in its first 10 years. It has nothing to do with charity. It was about believing that second chances are important and that people can change. In 2021, Caprio received an induction into the Rhode Island Heritage Hall of Fame. He should have been filled with pride, but he was also in anguish. A trustworthy municipal council colleague was found guilty in a bribery case in 2005. Frank had been his co-worker. He was devastated. After organizing a private tribute for the guy, he advocated for more stringent ethics education, which resulted in a new state code in 2006. It didn't make him flee. He accepted it, made the necessary corrections, and continued. All 5 of his children, 2 of whom had entered public service, were present as Dad was recognized that evening in 2021. He had taught them to rise, but to do so honorably.
He delivered one of his most impactful testimonies in front of legislators in 2015.
Families were being ruined by small court fines, according to a report.
People were suddenly risking eviction or losing their jobs after receiving a parking ticket or missing a date.
Frank had witnessed it.
He advocated for judges to receive sensitivity training. A new law was passed in less than 6 months. The maximum penalty was 10% of a family's income. Each judge was required to complete training on empathy.
It was a real change. Hardship fines decreased by 47% in just the first year. Frank Caprio was that person.
He made no mention of justice.
He gave it a human touch. In October 2023, he retired. His courtroom was dubbed the Chief Judge Frank Caprio Courtroom by the city.
300 persons attended the October 20th ceremony, including reporters, local officials, and previous defendants. He didn't go out in silence. He assisted in passing a 2024 law that had fines for low-income first-time offenders despite being a retired judge.
The relief was felt by almost 1,500 people.
His parting video from the courtroom went viral. 48 hours later, 2 million views. He acknowledged each member of his crew individually in it. The world watched as a man gracefully and without resentment exited the bench.
However, Frank received a pancreatic cancer diagnosis in November 2023.
A few weeks later, just before his 87th birthday, he made it public.
He described it as sneaky. He didn't mince words. He began radiation and chemotherapy almost immediately, alternating between Dana-Farber in Boston and Baptist Health South Florida.
On December 6, he posted a video asking for prayers.
Despite the worn look on his face, he smiled. His family remained close.
The general public remained nearer.
He has completed 5 radiation treatments and 6 months of chemotherapy by May 2024.
At the hospital, he rang the bell of healing. They played Happy Days Are Here once more while the personnel applauded.
He was given a gavel wrapped in gold ribbon.
He chuckled and referred to it as a hopeful milestone.
His spirit was high despite his poor energy.
The room was illuminated by that smile. Nevertheless, the illness persisted.
He continued to push through dread and exhaustion, clinging as long as he could to his hope. Pain worsened in August 2025.
From his hospital bed, he took one last video. He spoke more slowly, but it was obvious what he was saying. He expressed gratitude to everyone who had helped him. He claimed to have prayed for harmony. He died on August 20, 2025, at the age of 88, surrounded by Joyce and the 5 kids they had raised together. Hours before he passed away, he made his final social media post.
A final prayer request and adieu.
More than 1 million individuals expressed their condolences online after his passing. His funeral was broadcast live around the globe. Former defendants talked about how their lives had altered because of him. By then, Caught in Providence had received over 1 billion views. His book was now used in law schools as a teaching resource. Politicians, judges, and common folks all said the same thing. He softened the harshness of justice. In roughly 30% of his cases, mercy was granted. It wasn't because he was weak, but rather because he preferred stories to regulations.